everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us here with DBLAC. We're talking with Dr. DaMaris Hill, author of A Bound Woman is a Dangerous Thing, The Incarceration of African American Women, from Harriet Tubman to Sandra Bland. And I'm Ariana Brazier. I go by Ari. I'm a doctoral candidate in the English department. So let's just get started. Okay, so can you start by telling us about your writing process?
Okay. I pretty much throw up on the page. So it begins I begin by, I often use script handwriting to write what I'm thinking about in my mind. But my revision process is extremely intense. So I revise each poem sometimes 20 to 25 or more times. So when the publisher purchased the book, she purchased the book and told me if I didn't change anything in the book, she would take the book right now. And I went through the book and changed every poem probably twice after that. I am compulsive with revision. And a part of this book, I have different themes for different projects. So this book, the content of the woman's character had to match the context of the woman's life in the poem. So content and context had to come together. And so that required a lot of revision. Specifically in a different way where I might in other projects be working towards a unified theme. In this way, I was catering the revision toward personalities. Is that what you were looking for? Or do you want me to speak specifically about remix?
I'm going to backtrack a little. I actually have a more specific question about your writing process.
Yes.
But I realized that we should give more context to your writing, and I should ask you to read.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read one piece that I don't read often. It's called The Patriot and the Prisoner. On a literary note, you should know that this is also paying homage to Yusuf Kumnyaka's monologue entitled A One-Legged Stool, where it is a literary reenactment of what it would mean to be a Black prisoner of war during Vietnam. And being someone that is a former service member, I was very attracted to this piece, and I read it over and over and over again, and decided to write my life into a similar structure. And I do consider this monologue or this prose poem to kind of be the spine of the book, because it adds context to the poems that have come before and adds context to the poems that come after. The poems, this book begins with a chapter dedicated to my ancestors and ends with a chapter dedicated to my son, to my futures. So it starts with my past and culminates in my futures. The Patriot and the Prisoner. You didn't see that. I wasn't curled up like a baby, officer. You did not see me shit in the corner of the cell. Would you drag me out of solitary and then put a bullet through my brains, or worse, for nothing? You call that justice? I didn't do shit. I didn't rip the pages from the Bible and make cigarillos. I didn't take nothing from fucking nobody. You got it on video. Look, I've been kneeling here, running my fingers across concrete, wishing for water. You didn't see me dip my finger in my own urine and draw it to my nose. You didn't see it. You mind your goddamn business. My pee smell like Arizona iced tea. My tightly rolled locks keep falling from my afro in clumps. They taste like Skittles. Don't you know I'll never No, don't care what you whisper into the darkness of this cage, making me believe it came out of my own head. I won't believe a word. Lies, lies, lies. You're lying. Those state officials ain't say what you said they said. They ain't laughing at them protesters and the memorials. They ain't dropping those charges against your black-blooded blue brothers. I ain't cooperating in crippling democracy. They ain't talking to Senator Kamala Harris, President Kamala Harris like that, like she ain't a child of God. Lies, lies, lies. It ain't the way you say it is. I am American. I mean, if I were not here and you were on the other side of the door, like if I were in your neighborhood, I mean, would you shoot me on the lawn before I could ask you to take me to the hospital? Maxine Waters, she ain't stopped side-eyeing 45 like you say. Lies. How many times are you trying to kill me? Twice? 3 times? 4? How many? You can't break me. You ain't see me sweat. I wasn't never worried about your bullshit. You never saw my fist folded around my neck. The hand is quicker than the eye. The hand is quicker than the eye. You ain't see my hands around my neck. You didn't see me whisper, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. You ain't hear me, or did you? I'm laughing at you. I'm laughing at you. You think I'm the trouble coming your way? Oh yeah, what you say? You pig, you 5-0, you popo, you paramilitary. You ain't really real. You crooked cop. That's right. I can get nasty too. You want me to get nasty? You want me to be a little hot pot of bubbling brown sugar? You looking at me, blue badge daddy, looking in on me like I'm some raven? I'm sorry, like you some raven and I am some morsel of soft and slick in the soil. You don't know shit. I can give the devil hell. I am God's most beloved. I can take my life right now and be in heaven in the next minute. I am the mind-blowing miracle America made me, a womb-wearing trickster. Look at here, look at here. You know I know how to make love to a 2-ton cluster bomb. I rodeo ride 'em, baby. When I do, I call the name of every incendiary bullet like it's an infidel's child. I nibble on them. I use my teeth to engrave initials on the bullets. Oh, you don't believe me? You ain't see that? You ain't see that? The water in my eye? You'll find them initials right under USA when you find the bodies. Americans. We real good at making a mess disappear in a bigger one. The way we spray Agent Orange and burn lakes of crude oil, I mean, those lakes eat flesh, but the bullets, they stay. And it was my job to put some baby's name on each one. I know how to walk out of a nightmare backwards, baby, switching the whole while. Anything to grind a mind to dust. Who you looking at? You ain't see me shitting in a corner. I was over there showing you the wide rim of a golden goblet, the one sitting between my hips. Stop looking at me. Stop looking at me. I mean, what you think? You think I'm scared of you? You want to see me squirm? You think showing me how your band of brothers killing somebody else's child is going to somehow hurt me? Break me? You don't see me. You can't hurt me. I've been a warrior. You know who you looking at? You know who the fuck you looking at? My ancestors been here before the American Revolution. I'm a 3rd-generation veteran. And what the police force paying you? Enough to afford you a flip phone? Oh, I know. They say just enough to keep you standing here all day gazing in on me. Yeah, that's how it works. Keep the work dangerous and the wages low. You know who you looking at? You don't know who the fuck you looking at. You don't know who you looking at? The Department of Defense know me. Know my granddaddy. He helped them pilots first see through stone. He a yellow black man, but they call him infrared. He ain't like me. I'm like my granddad's grandfather. I'm maroon. What the fuck you looking at? What you like, my clothes, my perfume? In the 90s, the recruiters smell me coming. Static electricity and ashes. I tell them that I'm all star sign and clay, but they stupid like you and don't know the difference. All they know is my name. They know my name is worth cash to set me in a can box of missiles and bombs. I mean, technology and weapons, right? They rivet in my blood. Who you think you looking at? You better call that number. Name, rank, senior ailment, D, serial number 333, kiss my ass. Who you calling a wench? Use my name. Matter of fact, you ain't got the security clearance to know my fucking name. Matter of fact, make an utterance, any reference to me. See if your people don't throw you in the black lot and ignore your existence. What you think? You think I'm scared of you? You want to see me squirm? You think showing me your band of brothers killing somebody else's child is going to somehow hurt me, break me? You like me? You like me, Big Blue Daddy? I look pretty to you. I look like I could be your black baby. All this powder on my face, it ain't got his paint. I've been standing next to my son. He does BB bullets with cocaine. He got my soft eyes, you see. He takes the gun straight up to his nostril every 23 minutes. He been high ever since Trayvon died. See, he walks in and out of stores after football games in the streets because those roads swell with drunk white kids and he don't like to be called no nigger. So he walks in the middle on the yellow line and he is all hyped on coke because he wants to stay awake forever because all of this mess done drove the sleep from his soft eyes and the images of Mike Brown's dead body done stayed. You want to kiss my face? Soldier, officer, come here, Big Blue Daddy. Come and give me a kiss. Come give mama some sugar. You don't want some of this delicious? Remember how your granddaddy said all the good flesh been wasting ever since black folks left the field? He meant his bed, but it don't matter. When your dick is pulsing in my palms, your eye sockets will be emptied. You can't see me.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, before I mentioned, okay, so I'm kind of just all over the place. But before I mentioned that this poem, you said it's a prose
It's kind of a prose poem monologue. It's kind of a mix of a dramatic interpretation, a poem, and a memoir.
Okay, so this poem, memoir, monologue stuck to me. I'm the daughter of two former service members. My father is in the Navy and my mother was Army, and then both of my grandfathers were Air Force. Mm-hmm. And so I, as a child of a military brats, have a sort of ambivalence towards the military as well. Mm-hmm. I'm also the sister of three brothers. Mm-hmm. And so I felt this sort of tension in your writing that I've also been in dialogue with my mom about our place as mixed race Black and Filipino citizens in the U.S. who are former military children, or much of my life has been informed by the military still to this day.
Of course.
So I was wondering if you could talk through the tension that you felt and you continue to feel as a former U.S. serviceman and as a mother. Okay. And also kind of, I know in the introduction you mentioned this, that your status as a former serviceman, and you mentioned the tension you feel as a mother, but what doesn't come through until you actually read Patriot and Prisoner is also the sexualizing tension that's happening in this piece too. So if you could speak to like the intersection of all three of those.
Right. So most commonly, we refer to intersectionality as just being the intersections of race and gender. But we know that there's a complexity to American identity, that there are some concrete identity markers, and there's also moments of fluidity and certain ways that power is negotiated, particularly patriarchal, colonialist, imperialist power is negotiated by people that are believed to have lesser power. So in that situation, this piece kind of expresses the tensions and the complexity of me asking questions about what does it mean for me to be a Black woman in the United States that that may be perceived by others to have less power. What does it mean for a person like me to have intimate knowledge about not only how the patriarchal systems work, but how they are enforced around the globe to provide a certain amount of privilege and currency of being an American citizen that many will never even get to witness. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that. I have other things, but it'll get, I don't want it to get convoluted. So, yeah. I wouldn't be able to articulate those tensions without writing that piece. Like those tensions and the complexity of the way that those things intersect would be very hard for me to articulate without writing and revising that piece. That piece, in fact, took the least amount of revision. I only revised that piece about 4 or 5 times, and then it was done.
Why do you think that is, or why was that?
Probably because it was a good Black girl read. And in that way, like the histories in the book, it takes on a type of inside a mother tongue. And so always before I finish revising a poem or before I think a poem is finished, I take whatever I have written and I remix it or revise it in what I call my good Black girl mother tongue to see if I've missed any of the truths of the poem. And that's a piece where it just started off from the mother tongue. And it was in conversation with, again, Yusuf Kumnyaka's piece in his work, whom I respect greatly, who also, not only is he a Black man in America, but he's from New Orleans, Louisiana, and he's a descendant of Trinidadian immigrants. So his intersectional identity is very complex as well. And his masculinity is always very pronounced. So he's like 6'4", he has a very strong build. He went to Vietnam, but went to Vietnam as a journalist in a type of intellectual space. And one thing that he disclosed to me and another group of students or people that were there is that when he showed up in Vietnam, the first thing he noticed is that the people were harvesting rice, and he recognized his own American identity in the work that they were doing, in their labor. And so, yeah, I was thinking about that when I was thinking about him in this piece too. How do I recognize myself in what he's saying about this work, this military work? And because of my my specialty, there weren't a lot of female bodies in my specialty. So I mostly worked with men. So my perceptions of being gazed upon, I think, are very evident in that piece.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, in my question, I said it feels like you were being aggressed and incarcerated by the gaze of like a white officer or a white serviceman of some kind. So like that tension was evident to me. And I also think the ways, so like keeping in line with this idea or like the concept of the rope. And I've been thinking in terms of like weaving even. The tensions in this piece are like interwoven. You can't necessarily pull them apart and dissect them without the other pieces being critical to the formation of this piece.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think part of becoming a service member, or at least being in boot camp, is that outside of any immediate biological needs, your femininity is completely ignored. Your gender is ignored. even now, and I'm going to get in so much trouble, I'm always talking, but even now in the VA hospitals, like record keeping database, I don't think that there's a way to automatically notate any illnesses related to a woman's reproductive organs or a cis woman's organs, because it's a system that was taken from nearly 100 years ago and modified into a technological space, but not necessarily updated to include all bodies. And that's something that happens a lot in the military, because we have standards of physical fitness and norms that are not modified to meet the histories of genetic engineering in this country and breeding, right? So a person like me that's 5'2", the ideal weight for me would have been around 125, which I was never able to make. The smallest I was 135 pounds, and I wore a size 4 at that size, but I was still considered overweight.
So this is interesting because it leads me to two other kind of separate questions. The first one, thinking about tensions, I'm also thinking about knots, right? And I'm thinking about like the visceral impact of having knots in your stomach or knots in your muscles. All of this signify a tension in the body. And in that tension, we're also thinking about like trigger points. Like when you go to a massage, like the knots are actually trigger points. And also speaking with my mom, she pointed out that like when we get married, we tie the knot. So I was wondering like if you could discuss this relationship between knots and boundedness. Even on the cover, it's not just rope, there are knots in the ropes. And then I'll save my second question because you kind of almost alluded to this conversation on like biometrics, but we'll focus on the knots.
Okay. So I want to start by saying, before we even get to those questions, Octavia Butler has this saying that everything that touches you and that you touch changes. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So I was not responsible for the cover or the illustrations of the knots around the pictures. Those were book designers at Bloomsbury, but they also recognized the tensions of knots in my work. When I first started writing, I was very much attracted to and wrote a lot for many years in forms. So there are all types of constraints to the poem. And those constraints happen in syllables and in rhyme scheme. And for me, someone who likes Spanish literature and the way it sounds, it also happens for me in terms of composing sound in a poem. And then somewhere along my poetic trajectory, I learned that breaking the constraint was more enjoyable than writing inside the constraint. So I enjoyed the pleasure of living inside the bounds for a long time. And people praised me for that. My first poetry teacher was like, oh my God, you write so well in forms. This could really be a niche for you. And I didn't know the social, cultural, and literary historical implications for that type of analysis of my work and that type of suggestion. I didn't know. But when I learned to break a constraint, I really found out who I was and what my pleasure center as a writer was. And so even though there is a lot of emphasis on bound in this book being associated with negatives such as oppression and confinement, I made it a point in the revision process to make sure that each person sprung out of the constraint, or at least the narrative demonstrated a will not to be constrained. So bound, meaning to spring forward, was also an emphasis. So each poem has like a double helix thread in it of the ways that society intended to bound the subject or the woman and the ways that she sprang out of it.
Yeah, I'm like, I have all these like visual imagery going on in my mind, and I'm like literally imagining people not untying the knots, but like breaking these knots, these
Yes.
constraints, as you named them. But I'm also thinking about, so this morning I was listening to a lecture by Simone Brown on dark surveillance technologies, and black biometrics.
Mm,
And she was talking about this process of epidermalization and the ways that race is imposed on our skin. And
mm-hmm.
what stood out to me the most in her lecture was how she connected biometrics and epidermalization. She said that they connect in, quote, the idea that the body will reveal the truth about the subject, despite the subject's claims, end quote. So I was thinking about like the skin and the imprints and scars that
Mm-hmm.
ropes leave on people's skins, on black bodies throughout
Mm-hmm.
history, the ways like ropes have left imprints and scars. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on like what these scars might reveal about black bodies, about black subjectivity in the U.S.
Um, so I think of technology and issues such as race in a different way. And I think that all of that may be true, but I don't know enough about her theories of biometrics and the skin. But what I will say is that the skin is the most easily manipulated biometric in human reproduction. And it's a very minuscule factor in terms of analyzing your DNA. But it's also the most perverse and pervasive factor in which we make all or most medical decisions in the United States are based on demographics rooted in race and gender. And for that reason, I was 40 years old before I was diagnosed with celiac, even though people of Scottish and Irish descent have been in this country for over 400 years with Africans. So surely some of the genetic diseases and materials that happen from that space could be found in a Black body. But because of the way that we study medicine in this country, people think because I have Black skin that I can't possibly have this disease. My aunt wasn't diagnosed until she was 65. So we've been living all of our lives eating a protein that was negatively affecting our intellectual thought processes and our abilities to move in this world. So that's one thing. But the second thing I was going to say, I'm sorry, thinking about technology and complexions, I think a lot about the camera and how the camera, like a lot of technology and the history of technology, in terms of digital technology and the technology that we use in the Western world, at times is very white supremacist and maybe in a conscious or an unconscious way. So one of the ways that it happens unconsciously that we are affected by technology and the racism associated with it is the ways that cameras work and the way that we develop and expose film. So when a picture is taken of someone who has a lighter complexion, or in this case, I will call an American Creole that reads as white, because I want to also focus on biological race being some type of mythology. They will be rendered in the negative exposure as Black. And then in the photo print that prints the negative of the negative, they come off white, and it's the adverse for darker skin. So darker skin is registered as white in the negative and then reproduced as Black. So when I think about the falsehoods and the funhouse mirror fictions of technology and race, that's what I think of most profoundly. But I will check into that theory that you just talked about. And the scarring. The scarring is not only on the physical body, it's in all places. Can be read on the tongue, can be read in the eyes, can be witnessed in the dreams. It's in all of those places.
Yeah, I think that there's a relationship between like scarring and grief. And that's another like emotion that I read very deeply in all of your pieces was this relationship to grief. In the intro, you said, and this part really stood out to me, you said, you've concluded that you must give yourself permission to love, wail, weep, grieve, call on ancestors, begin a daily ritual of resistance, even if it is rooted in your fears. And I felt like much of this book was about grief, like Black women's grieving, and it was for Black women who are grieving. And I was curious about what grief has to do with fears, and in this writing process, like in the creation of this book, did it reveal a new relationship to fear that you might have?
That's a really hard question. I haven't thought about that before. I can just talk about grief when I was writing this book. I was, I'm one of those writers that believe if there's no laughter for the writer, there's no laughter for the reader. If there's no tears for the writer, there's no tears for the reader. And so some of these poems are very much elegies. And in that way, I want to pay homage and really connect with some of the people in this work without ignoring the sacrifice or what might have been destroyed in their transition or in their oppression. So it's a multiple grieving. It's like a grieving for the person, a grieving for the potential of the person's work, a grieving for the erasure of the person's genius, and a grieving that others didn't know this woman intimately, that I didn't know her intimately, and that others didn't know her as intimately.
Do you think that has like some relationship to maybe to the fear that you allude to, that there's this fear that there will continue to be Black women who are not known so intimately?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In my artist statement, I often talk about, I don't come from a generation of artists that fear death, but fear that we will be erased. All of us know that our biological space in this world will end. But the sacrifices that we made for this intellectual work, for what we did with our labors and with our sweats and how we spent our time, we don't want that to also die.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So also thinking about labor, thinking about generations and the way you even structured your book, you said you begin with an ancestor and you conclude with your son. So I mentioned my grandmother and my mother. Both of them are seamstresses. Well, my grandmother was a seamstress and my mother is a seamstress. And I was just thinking about the ways that like rope and in my case thread specifically have tied Black women and women of that diaspora together across generations.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking specifically of two children's books. This is The Rope by Jacqueline Woodson. And in the book, the rope is an heirloom that's passed down and it's used to decorate photos and mantelpieces, to jump rope. The father teaches the daughter how to tie knots with it. And then in Harriet Power's Journey from Slave to Artist, Sewing Stories, it's a true story, or it's based on a true story, where these enslaved women were teaching their daughters and their granddaughters how to quilt. And in the quilt, they would capture stories that they could not write down. And so I was curious, or I was wondering what you thought the relationship might be across generations, like the rope and the tying together of Black women across generations, and what that reveals about like our labor and even our storytelling practices.
Well, I think it reveals that our storytelling practices aren't monolithic. And one of the reasons that I didn't become a historian is because I felt the methods associated with historical narratives were limited to Western ideologies and tools that reinforced imperialism, white supremacy, and colonialism. So I was discouraged by that. Even though I love stories associated with history, I didn't want to be bound to those stories in that way. And And this book is kind of set up like a quilt. It's a quilting together of archival materials, of histories, of mother tongues, and of what I call like the praise songs, which are like the poems. But I call it a remix because this is all digital material that has been formatted for the page. But that's not necessarily the compositional way that it comes to me in my mind. The page is an afterthought for me.
So you just mentioned the spirituals, and it made me think of your poem, I believe, on Fannie Lou Hamer, and you incorporate like spirituals in it, and also thinking
Those
about
are all her songs.
the songs you incorporated.
Yes,
Oh,
those are songs that she sings, and those are songs that she used to sing at the voter registration rallies, and when she was motivating people. You know, we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer being, you know, this awesome activist, but people rarely talk about how she used her art form of her voice to motivate people, and how even that is not only profoundly American because that style of voice that she used emanates from the work song and the labor that Black people have been doing on the land since they got here, but it's also innately African. And so even though she is shaping this new world idea of democracy in this Protestant place, this new world Protestant religious space, what she's doing is very old world.
So this is like really exciting to me. My research is in childhood studies, and I work with and look at the ways that Black children play. And so when I read that particular poem, I was actually thinking of Kira Gaunt's book on Black girls in Double Dutch. And so I'm thinking about this relationship between the rope and these chants that these Black girls are doing as they're jump roping, and how they echo back to like an Afro-diasporic story.
Absolutely. And you also have to look at the rope as a syncopated rhythm and drum.
That's what I was thinking of, the ways like the rope actually acts as like a song in and of itself. And the ways
Absolutely.
like the rope brought us to this poem on Hamer. So I thought that was just the coolest thing. Even in this poem of like labor and hardship, right? I'm still thinking of like the ways that like joy is created through the same things, right? Through these chants, through these spirituals, through these songs.
I'm very interested in your work. I'm like already thinking about it in my mind. Like, ooh, jump rope. Okay. Sorry.
Well, because that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about all the ways like rope is used, and that was another reason I called my mom up. I was like, "What else do you do with string or twine?" And we were talking about sewing, quilting, weaving, crocheting, all of these things that have to do with like knotting. And in Jacqueline Woodson's book, This Is the Rope, there's a moment where the father teaches the daughter how to tie a knot, and he says, "Whatever you tie together, you want to last." Right. And so just thinking about the ways these knots connect Black women, and specifically in my family across generations, it really your book was a reflexive read for me.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it is very poignant in very beautiful ways.
I wanted to say something else about rope that's less connected to Black women, but connected to women in incarceration. At one point in American history, the women that were incarcerated in Leavenworth, Kansas, made all of the rope that the military used west of the Mississippi. And this is during covered wagon days. And a lot of those women were going to jail for sexual crimes or sexually accused crimes. And you could have a lover or a patron that could have accused you for giving them a venereal disease. And these women would automatically be locked up and put into these camps where they were harvesting hemp and making all the rope that the military needed west of the Mississippi, which we know is a significant amount of rope just based on the amount of space.
That's wild.
Right.
That is wild. So also, okay, so that the incarceration leads me to a question that you actually posed
Mhm.
in your introduction. And I've been excited. I've been waiting all day to ask this question.
Oh
You
gosh.
said, you said, what is it about black women bound to her, a black woman bound to her own liberation that makes people terrified of their own shadows, their own darkness?
Mhm.
You, that's your question. So I want to know what you think it is. Like, what is it about
I
a
want to
black
know
woman?
what you think it is first.
I ask first.
I know, but it's no fair if I give all the answers because the question is really for the reader. What do you think when you hear that? Like, what is it about that question that like poked you in the heart and tickled you in the ear? What made you attracted to that?
So there's like a million things like firing off in my brain right now.
Hmm.
The first one though is the ways in which like black women and women of color, but specifically black women are read as intimidating. And I think about this tweet I saw often where it was like, it's not that we're intimidating, it's that you're intimidated.
Hmm.
And thinking about like perception in the ways that like black women have a way of like holding up a mirror to other people.
Hmm.
Um, like you said, to make them fear their own shadows, their own darkness.
Hmm.
Um, so I was thinking about that, right? Like it's not always what we are, it's what you perceive in us that reveals
Absolutely.
something else about you, right? Like a deep fear or a deep longing of something or like a chasm of sorts.
Hmm.
That was my first inclination. It's that like black women are mirrors to each other, to other people in like these very beautiful ways, but for some people, very painful ways.
For yes, that's what I was getting at. For other people, very painful ways. You know, because of the way our social constraints work and because of the way we negotiate power in a patriarchal society, it's very easy for people to believe that their privilege adds more human value to their life. And so if you think that you are more valuable to society because you are a man, or you think that you are more valuable to society because you possess a certain race or belong to a culture of whiteness, or because you have more economic power, you think that that the privilege of like that skin color or the privilege of that gender or the economic privilege that you have is like real currency that makes you hierarchically better than your peers that don't possess that, when your peers that don't possess that also demonstrate intelligence, power, knowledge of their humanness, and a sense of embodied self that destabilizes that mythology. It automatically destabilizes it. So either the person subconsciously and or consciously and immediately has to question how they embody that space.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, it's a point of reflection. For others, it's a point of tension because they assume that their hierarchy was born into their biology and economic status.
Yeah. So I have you touched on skin, and I have my own theories around like light and like what that does for like people like psychologically. Like in the light, it's much harder to hide, right? It's harder
Yes.
to hide from these things, and I do believe that like black women carry the power of the sun, right? We harness the sun and the light and energy in our bodies. So when we're carrying it forth with us, we are shining lights on these corners that people would rather hide in darkness. So that was the other thought. Um, I had, and since you mentioned skin, and I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about like the ways that our skin is reflected in light and what that reflects to other people too, or like what
Mm-hmm.
what they're no longer able to run from because now you're in the light of the sun.
I totally respect every bit of your belief, but I am wishing, hoping, and envisioning that all people embody light.
Hmm.
Some people are more comfortable revealing more comfortable sharing their spiritual or innate aspects over their over other things. But it was something else I was thinking about that you said that was really, really important. In thinking about the ways that people carry the sun. But what if it's also, like, what if it's embodying light and reflecting light at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, how does that happen on a body? Question. That's it. I'll put that on the back burner for later. But just, you know, like, question in my head.
I like that.
Yeah.
We will parking lot that because we actually have a question from the audience.
Okay. Now I'm really scared because your questions were super hard.
Were they?
Mm-hmm. But it was good. It was good. It made me think.
Hello, my name's Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. I love your hair.
Oh, thank you. My question is about, you mentioned a moment ago, or a couple questions back, about Funhouse Mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about horror genres and Black women's relationship to horror stories,
Mm-hmm.
and how that shows up. I really like how you talked about your work as like a remix quilt, and these histories all woven together. And so I just was wondering if you could talk more about your relationship to horror genres, or more about the remix quilt. Either one of those things I was really fascinated by.
Okay, so I can tell you that I do not read many horrors, and I definitely do not watch them. I have the kind of mind where if things get in, they do not get out easily.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to be careful about what I witness or what I conjure in my mind, because what I can imagine and what a horror writer imagines is far more intense than whatever hits the page.
Yeah.
Because they have to go too far and then edit back to the enough.
Mm-hmm.
Because of my relationship with constraints, editing back to the enough is a challenge for me because I like going too far in the reading. So, and in the writing. So what I imagine would not be something that I can come back quickly from. And in writing this book, not that it's a composition of horrors, but towards the end of this book of the editing process, if they wanted me to change anything, they had to give me a page number, because I can go into the book sometimes, and because of our current cultural climate, I used to come out of my writing and I would like watch stand-up almost exclusively for balance. Mm-hmm. But because there's not as much laughter in our cultural content right now, it's harder for me to come back from these spaces that I write about. And yeah, my stuff is a remix. I'm sampling history, I'm sampling archives, and I'm putting lyrical content on top of that. So this book is kind of like a self-contained cipher in that way.
Okay.
But I'm only ciphering with myself, right? So like,
yeah.
Or the multiple aspects of my intellectual self.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah, or really schizophrenic. But either which way, I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. I'm cool with it. Whatever it is, I'm cool with it. And maybe that's the horror story in itself, right?
That's a lot to think about.
Yeah, you gave me a lot to think about.
Okay. I definitely feel the same way about horror. I write about Afrofuturism, and a lot of the time I'm thinking about stories and that idea that how far to go and then edit back from. I can really relate to that.
Yes. And I actually,
I can scare myself worse than what I could watch.
Right. And I used to teach a writer's camp for middle school students, and I had the most brilliant horror writer student ever. Like, she was so brilliant that I could never read past the first page, because the first page was so intense that I knew I couldn't witness the horrors happening afterward. And she would read like Stephen King and those types of horror writers exclusively. But she was a middle school girl, and she took 2 pills to go to bed and 1 pill to wake up. Like, her mind was active all the time. And but she was brilliant. She was a brilliant writer. She was a brilliant writer. Yeah. So yeah, it's always the process of scaling back from the horror. Good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would be interested to read it, and then I'll be like, oh no, I can't. But yeah, keep writing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And hopefully our futures are not as horrible as some of the things that our ancestors have already survived. Now, this is a horror story for you, and this is from Lucille Clifton. Lucille Clifton said, anything that you can imagine has already happened.
Yes.
That's a horror story.
Yeah.
Thank you for talking to us tonight. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you decided to structure the book, like how you decided which poems to put where. I thought what was really interesting, you mentioned this before, that the book starts off with this personal connection and then ends on a different kind of personal connection. And one of the things I felt really strongly coming through was this idea of like intergenerational experiences, and how generations of Black women were dealing with different types of struggle, similar types of struggle. But I was really curious about how you ordered the poems, and how you decided how to put them in ways to speak to each other.
Yes, that was work for me. It wasn't as easy because as I've already indicated, I really have a disdain for sequential and linear stories, like a disdain. So I didn't know how to write the story straight. Even in the novel I'm working on, it's not linear. I don't know how to do that. So the work came in with how to put these women together, how to thematically link them. And this book is my first poetry manuscript. So the second poetry manuscript of this draft was just entitled Bound, because that one word allowed me to talk about oppression, being fettered as incarceration, and springing forward. And then when I really started playing with the word bound, I realized that I could get a lot of connotation and denotation out of that word. And so it became this like revolving or snowflake or multiple entendre that I use the different definitions to thematically link the women. Now, I will say initially, the histories were all in the back of the book in one section, kind of like you would use, like an index to reflect like some of my my academic preferences. Like to have a book that you can also do work with, like you flip back and forth in it and you play with it. And it's kind of like, for me, those types of books, like a medical dictionary or a book of scholarship that has an appendix, like all of that is like a game for me. It's like buried treasure. Like I really like to go back and play with that. But my editor was like, no, that's too hard for people. She was like, everybody doesn't want to flip back and forth in these pages. They need to be in some way cued or prepared, or as we say in cognitive psychology, a schema had to be created for them to ingest the layers of the work. So my editor suggested that the histories go next to the pictures, and I was kind of resistant of that at first. because I wanted the poems to be experienced in their isolation. But what my editor believed, and I think that she at this point was right, my editor was like, well, your book's not only going to be for academic audiences, other women would want to enjoy this book. And do you want them to be discouraged or to think that the book is inaccessible to them? And that would go against my Black feminist ethics. So I had to make that kind of choice. And so I think she made the right choice. And I just made sure that when I edited the histories, thinking of my Black feminist ethics, that they were not written in an exclusively academic tongue.
So when you think about biography and the work that a reader would have to do, and your admission that like some of these women have been overlooked or never even considered in this way, how did you decide what biographical information to include? Because in some ways, when you think about the work, even with an audience that's academic or not, and I guess I don't want to assume, I'd love to hear from you, like, is it not that we want the reader then to inquire further, to think more deeply or beyond what was shared here? So that circles back to my original question of how did you decide what amount of biographical information to include? I mean, I thought that they were very concise and consistent snapshots, but that had to be a laborious task to imagine what was necessary for the reader.
That's also a part of the revision process. So I kind of avoided, for more well-known people, I avoided the obvious. But it was also really important for me to demonstrate that what we call like a Black feminist ethos and praxis of solidarity is not something we came up with in the 70s. Like Zora Neale Hurston was demonstrating solidarity in the 30s when she wasn't getting paid to write Ruby McCullum's story. But then as soon as Ruby McCullum's case was over, she published a fictional story based on Ruby McCullum in the Atlantic. She continued to cover her story because she felt it was important, despite the fact that she wasn't getting paid. So Zora Neale Hurston, which I hope I can be this smart, came up with a way where she wasn't going to be exploited in her labor, but was going to remain in solidarity with a Black woman that she felt had been done an injustice. And so I wanted to demonstrate how these threads of solidarity are present, and that is always erased, in my opinion, from Black women's histories, because popular narratives want you to believe that America is a place where you are just born on this soil or you land on this soil and you become this individualized superhero. And none of us live individual lives. None of us make it. None of us survive in isolation. But it's even more important in this master American bootstrap narrative of rags to riches that people operate in isolation. But that has never been true. And it's really important for me to talk about how acts of solidarity, love, and generosity have been motivational factors for a lot of different Americans, but specifically for Black women. So it was important for me to tell what people think is a minor biographical note about Ida B. Wells and her history with lynching, that she got involved because her best friend's husband was torn from her best friend's bed and lynched. That was the motivating force. She was so in empathy with her best friend and so impacted by her best friend's suffering that she constructed a life around it. What does that say about solidarity and Black feminist ethics? And so that's something that I wanted to make sure that the biographies entailed. And then I wanted the other information the biographical information that may shed light on the multiple aspects of these women's humanness that might be left out of the more popular narratives. But I always look for the glitch in the matrix. That's my thing. I look for the hole, I look for the glitch, I look for the pop, I look for the skip, I look for that. That's where I want to be. I am working on something new right now, and I'm gonna try to articulate it. It's in a space of tension. So I'm working on two things. One is the novel. The novel is about little girls that went to prison during the 1930s. It's about intersectional identities, pretty privilege, and multiple layers of oppression that's associated with intersectional identity and confinement. That book has 12 voices, and it's scary to people that were taught to read after, let's say taught to read before 1992 or 94. But people that are 13 love the book because I think unconsciously, but I composed the style in a literary style that is closely related or parallel to the way that people read the internet. So younger people love it, older people are very frustrated by it. And it's kind of a game in pages. So older people are very frustrated by it. They, people want me to make they're definitely not getting a linear narrative. I'm sorry for being this is a place of tension for me because I think about this a lot. But a more familiar narrative people want, but I think it needs the 12 pages. It needs in that book I have many fictional forms and fictional documents that are not remotely true, but when people read them, they think they're all true. And so I think that's why else people get frustrated because they're like, I'm reading nonfiction. I'm like, no, you're not. You're reading fiction. I just made it look like nonfiction. So that's one thing I'm working on is that novel. And the other thing I'm working on now is a group of poems about Black girlhood historically and Black girlhood in our contemporary space. Yes, that's what I'm working on now. And I'm in the middle, so it's really messy.
Mm-hmm. Important work.
I hope so.
It already is.
Okay.
I want to thank you for your time and your energy and your amazing book.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and to read the book. I appreciate all of you so very, very much. I didn't think that people younger than me were going to be into the book. I thought people were going to think that the book was for older people. I was very concerned about that in my mind as an artist because the ideal audience are people that are younger than me and like my niece. Like I'm trying to leave y'all the code, like how to get through, right? So I didn't want people that were already familiar with the women to pick up the book exclusively. I wanted people who might not have known the women to get a hold of the book. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for the time to speak with me about the book. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.